So welcome to week 3 of our journey exploring the Pranidhana Raja and how it serves as a profound expression of the Bodhisattva's path toward enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. Week 1 was the program introduction, and last week, in week 2, we went through the verses on the benefits of reciting and practicing this King of Aspiration prayers. We've already touched on the text's focus on infinite aspiration, and this week we will dive into the importance of preparatory practices in cultivating the conditions necessary for spiritual growth and the actualization of this infinite or inconceivable aspiration. So this week we'll be covering the first 12 verses of the prayer, which comprise the 7-branch offering. This is a comprehensive set of practices meant to purify the mind and the heart, to cultivate merit, to purify negativities, and foster the development of bodhicitta, which is the mind aspiring towards enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. As we've seen in previous weeks, the Pranidhana Raja is deeply revered in Mahayana Buddhism for its profound expression of the aspiration of bodhicitta, and also how it lays the groundwork for the Bodhisattva's infinite journey. And in Tibetan Buddhism, these 12 verses are often recited as a standalone prayer. The 7-branch offering has 7 preliminaries: prostration, offering, confession, rejoicing, requesting the Buddhas to turn the wheel of Dharma, requesting them not to enter nirvana, and dedication. Each practice addresses specific afflictions and karmic obstacles, functioning as antidotes that prepare the practitioner for the profound aspiration toward enlightenment. For those of you who are Nundro practitioners, you'll also recognize these practices as the foundations of the Nundro, or the preliminary practices. And in the same way that the practice of Nundro and the Vajrayana allows us to accumulate the merit to successfully practice sadhana, these 12 verses could be considered as a Nindro for the Pranidhana Raja itself, enabling us to engage more fully in the inconceivable verses that lie ahead of us. And this week we'll go through these 7 preliminaries, both on the more relative and material level, but also on the level of emptiness and non-duality, seeing them both as a preparation for the later verses that focus more on emptiness and inconceivability, and also as an expression of this vast Mahayana view, and an opportunity to integrate this non-dual view into practice, even in these so-called preliminaries. So hence the image for this week is of inconceivable offerings. This is also an opportunity to acknowledge the natural presence of doubts and hesitations on the spiritual path. These initial verses, while serving as preparatory practices, are also an opportunity for us to reflect on our own aspirations and doubts that may arise as we consider how we might commit to a practice. This kind of reflection is not a hurdle, but could be seen as an integral part of the journey, deepening the practitioner's commitment and understanding. This session is also an invitation to embark on an inner journey that mirrors the infinite aspiration of the Bodhisattva. So I encourage you to see these verses not merely as academic, but a deeply personal engagement with the practices to cultivate the ground for spiritual awakening. And I'd like to encourage you to approach the session with openness to experiencing both the aspirations and the doubts as vital aspects of your path. So let us journey through the verses with the heart of a bodhisattva, aspiring to benefit all sentient beings. And as last week, let's take a moment to tune our motivation and set our intention. Okay, so let's turn to the verses. Now, in introducing them, Rinpoche said, in order to make your aspiration powerful, or even to actually have the ability to aspire, we need a few preparations. He said these are sort of easier parts, so I'm going to go through them very quickly. Which he did in general. But I will say that because they are also covering material that was in the Bodhisattva teachings, his teachings on Shantideva's Bodhicharyavatara, and also in the Nindra teachings. He has actually taught these topics in very great depth, but probably 20 years ago. So I wouldn't take his words to imply these are simplistic, but rather that we have a lot of material at our disposal already to study and practice these. He said, in order to create this ability to aspire, we try to accumulate merit by doing these 7 limb practices. And as Buddhists, we are followers of cause and effect. So first we need to persevere in gathering the necessary positive causes and conditions to fulfill this prayer. And we're all doing our best to cultivate aspiration and to put our aspiration into practice. But of course it doesn't always work out the way we intend. And this gap between our aspiration and our action is considered a lack of merit, or the lack of causes for fulfilling the aspiration. Which brings us back to habits and training. To use the mountain climbing analogy we used last week, if we don't have the right equipment, or if we haven't adequately invested in our physical fitness, we may not be able to complete the climb. However, bodhisattvas don't give up in the face of challenges. They redouble their aspiration and their practice so that things will be different going forwards. Rinpoche also said one may wonder, for how long should we aspire? And he said it's as infinite as the sky. There are innumerable or infinite sentient beings, and as infinite as these sentient beings, there are also infinite numbers of defilements and emotions. And so the bodhisattva's aspiration will also be infinite. So as he said, this is a long-term project. He said actually long is not the right word. This is a forever project. We should kind of really give up on the idea of getting enlightenment. We should instead pray that forever and ever we will be practitioners of this Pranidhana Raja, and that this is the only thing we will do. That should be our aspiration. Okay, so with that context, first prostration, which is verses 1 and 2 of the prayer. Prostration, which is also about reverence, involves showing respect and veneration towards the 3 jewels, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Prostrations are both physical and mental acts of humility and devotion, acknowledging the qualities of the enlightened ones. So the verses. To all the Buddhas, the lions of the human race, in all directions of the universe, through past and present and future. To every single one of you, I bow in homage. Devotion fills my body, speech, and mind. Through the power of this prayer, aspiring to good action, all the victorious ones appear, vivid here before my mind, and I multiply my body as many times as atoms in the universe, each one bowing in prostration to all the Buddhas. So, in commenting on these verses, Rinpoche talked a little bit about the visualization. He said, because of the power of the aspiration, it doesn't take any time to gather all these Tathagatas of the 10 directions in 3 times. The moment you want to aspire, they're all there, ready to be your witness, ready to be your support. And he said, I guess amongst all these hundreds and thousands of Buddhas, you should not forget the Bodhisattva Samantabhadra silently riding this giant beast, his elephant. He said he always likes to visualize hundreds of other elephants, sort of slowly moving. He said, I don't know if you've ever seen elephants. They're very silent. They're the biggest animals, but when they walk, you don't know. And also they have the most beautiful eyes. They have the most beautiful way of looking at you. They see you, but they always make you feel like they're not looking at you. Yes, so visualizing thousands of elephants would be good. It's considered a tendril, as it's said in Tibetan. Also, the person ourselves offering prostration is not just a single human making a single prostration, but one can imagine oneself manifesting in infinite numbers, as many as the atoms that could possibly exist in the whole universe. We might think of this perhaps as a Vajrayana method, but this is also a Mahayana way of thinking, a Mahayana attitude. So first, with the body, we offer prostration thinking that there are as many bodies as there are atoms in the universe prostrating along with us. And to whom do we prostrate? The Buddhas of the past, the present, and even those Buddhas who have not yet become Buddha, the future Buddhas. So as Rinpoche said, even here, right at the beginning, the ordinary concept of time is already broken. So even in the very first verse, we're already taking this vast and inconceivable view of non-duality. The essence of prostration is to surrender. So when we are prostrating, we are mentally surrendering to a person that we consider valid, the enlightened person who is non-deceiving. I think it's worth considering in our ordinary lives who it is that we are willing to bow down to, so to speak, right? Who do we wish to emulate? Who do we respect? Who do we surrender to? Who are we willing to follow? Who are our role models? I dare say, who are the influencers in the online world that we follow? Just ask ourselves, who are we effectively prostrating to without necessarily thinking of it in those terms? So back to the visualization. In some of the other commentaries, it says those with sharp mental faculties can think of the array of pure fields of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the multitude of the 10 directions as being present right here with us in the room. However, the commentaries also say, for beginners, it's advised to visualize the field of accumulation or the field of merit, which those of you who do the ninja are familiar with, so the focal object can appear more easily. So just to say, of course, ultimately we would love to be able to practice this with infinite copies of ourselves, prostrating to infinite Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in all the times and directions. But as beginners, it may be more straightforward for us just to imagine a single field of merit, a single Buddha and Bodhisattva surrounding with sentient beings, rather than to get lost in an overcomplicated visualization, but then to aspire, as our practice becomes more stable, more solid, to add this added dimension of the inconceivability to our visualization. So as I've already mentioned, this is a Mahayana text, but I know many of you listening to this are Vajrayana practitioners who are practicing ninja or guru yoga or a sadhana practice, or others who are just interested in the Vajrayana path and not yet practitioners. So although the Vajrayana is beyond our scope today, I would like to say that, in my view, it's the most profound technique or technology that I know of for actualizing the core Mahayana view of form is emptiness, emptiness is form. In other words, a technique to allow us to go beyond mere intellectual understanding of these words, though that is already difficult, and turn them into lived experience. And perhaps even more important, it can help cultivate a lived experience of emptiness and non-duality, even in those among us who struggle with the intellectual understanding of this profound view. So in the spirit of Ninja, I just want to turn briefly to the Longchen Nyingchik Ninja and the words in the commentary, Patrul Rinpoche's words of my perfect teacher, Kunzang Lama Shalom. And here you'll see the commentary appears in the section on Guru Yoga. And here Patrul Rinpoche says, for this practice, visualize that you are emanating 100, then 1,000, then innumerable bodies like your own, as numerous as the particles of dust in the universe. and at the same time visualize that all beings, as infinite as space itself, are prostrating with you. So, I know among Rinpoche students, some are doing Longchen Nyingtik Nyingdro, some are doing Chetsen Nyingtik Nyingdro, and in both cases, this 7-branch offering appears in the Guru Yoga after the initial visualization and invocation, and before the supplication or maturing the siddhi, which comes before invoking the blessing. So the location of the prayer in these Guru Yogas is the same, but the language, of course, is quite different between different practices. And certainly the Chetsen Nyingtik Nyingdro has language that is more non-dual, I suppose one could say. So in Longchen Nyingtik, the line is, I prostrate emanating as many bodies as there are particles of dust in the whole universe. And in the Chetsen Nyingtik, it says, I prostrate beyond meeting and separation. So I think these ideas like beyond meeting and separation can be challenging to understand and put into practice, especially for beginners like us. We will come back to emptiness again and again over the coming weeks. But the key point is that the 7-branch offering is there to accumulate merit before the supplication and invoking the blessing in the Guru Yoga. And invoking the blessing is none other than realizing the nature of mind, which is none other than realizing emptiness and non-duality. Yeah, so in that way, the Vajrayana form of practice is doing something very similar to what we're doing in the Pranidhana Raja. And we have a preliminary to accumulate merit so that when it comes to realizing the nature of emptiness, the nature of mind, receiving the blessings of the Guru, we've accumulated enough merit so that that actually has some effect in our practice. So I also want to give just an everyday example for each of these 7. And I encourage you to find ways in your own daily life of thinking how you might bring this to life in your moment-to-moment activities. So I considered the example of going to a grocery store. And how might you apply prostration or reverence in that example? Well, while you might not physically prostrate in a grocery store, you can practice this principle by cultivating a mindset of gratitude and respect. You can acknowledge the effort of countless individuals involved in producing and delivering the food to the shelves, from farmers to truck drivers to store employees. And this acknowledgement can help cultivate humility and a sense of interconnectedness. So I really invite you to be very creative with this kind of contemplation and visualization and practice. Find a way of making it come alive in your own life, whether it's when you're out in the world or at work, with your families, with your children, with your friends. Find ways of thinking to yourself, what would it mean to practice the 7-branch offering in this context, here and now? Okay, so the 2nd branch is offering, verses 3 to 7. And here we make offerings, both material, like flowers, incense, light, and so forth, and immaterial, such as the offering of our practice, or our merit, or our virtues. These offerings are made without any attachment or expectation of reward, aiming to cultivate generosity and reduce greed. Now hear the verses. In every atom preside as many Buddhas as there are atoms, and around them all their bodhisattva heirs. And so I imagine them filling completely the entire space of reality. Saluting them with an endless ocean of praise, with the sounds of an ocean of different melodies, I sing of the Buddha's noble qualities, and praise all those who have gone to perfect bliss. To every Buddha I make offerings of the loveliest flowers or beautiful garlands, of music and perfumed ointments, the best of parasols, the brightest lamps, and finest incense. To every Buddha I make offerings, exquisite garments, and the most fragrant scents, powdered incense heaped as high as Mount Meru, arranged in perfect symmetry. Then the vast and unsurpassable offerings, inspired by my devotion to all the Buddhas, and moved by the power of my faith in good actions, I prostrate and offer to all you victorious ones. So with these verses, Rinpoche is saying we declare the glory and the greatness of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to the three worlds, and then we offer whatever we human beings can think of as good and worthy of offering. For instance, flowers, garlands, music, perfume, parasols, lamps. And Rinpoche said each of these is very romantic. You have to think about being in India 2,500 years ago. He said, yeah, maybe nowadays you might give someone an iPhone charger, but 2,500 years ago there was no electricity. So it's such a beautiful gift to give someone a lamp, ready-made with oil and wick, especially to the sublime beings, incense, robes, all kinds of food, soap, bathrobes, toothpaste, basically whatever comes into your mind. In other teachings he's talked about, anything from this relative world that we consider valuable, desirable, swimming pools, beaches, even influencers on social media, whatever it is that we value, we offer to all of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And so the last of those verses, the seventh verse, is the unsurpassable or inconceivable offering, which cannot be conceived of by this limited human mind. So how are we supposed to make an inconceivable offering? So for beginners, when we offer something like a flower, we typically think this is a flower, nothing more, nothing less. So to make it into an inconceivable offering, when you offer a flower, you can think that it is not just a flower, but that it is infinite foods, drinks, basically all the phenomena that can be included in samsara and nirvana. And at a glance, when we think that way, it would seem it's just a mental fabrication. But Rinpoche insisted it's not just a mental fabrication, because if we think deeply, we realize even just one flower, because of different perceptions of different sentient beings, they will perceive it in very different ways. For example, if a goat were to wander in right now, probably the goat would relate to that flower as food rather than we might relate to it, and so on. And so for the time being, for beginners, right, and those of us who are on what's called the stage of aspiring conduct, in other words, the first two of the five paths, which is the paths of accumulation and the path of joining, the way to make an inconceivable offering is to approach it in that way, right? To think that one flower is not just one flower, but everything that could exist. But Rinpoche said in Bodh Gaya in 2023, he said, for those of you who are meditators, for those, in other words, who are able to not follow the past thought or anticipate the future thought, but who can remain in the present moment without fabricating or constructing anything, that is the actual inconceivable offering. And he's also said, if you can practice in that way, that is not just the inconceivable offering, that's also prostration, confession, rejoicing. In fact, it's all of the seven branches. If you are able to do that, that is the highest and best way of practicing each and every one of these seven branches. So returning to the words of my perfect teacher, Patrul Rinpoche said for this branch, he said, set out as many offerings as your resources permit, as was explained in the chapter on the mandala offering. That is to say, using clean and perfectly pure offerings, and without being ensnared by miserliness, hypocrisy, or ostentation. These offerings are just the support for your concentration. And then make a mental offering in the manner of the Bodhisattva Samantabhadra. So even there you see that the Nindro commentary is referring to this prayer, but also it's, I think, suggesting for those of us who want to make this prayer into more of a formal practice, we can also set up our shrine with offerings as we would if we were practicing the mandala offering. So I think you can think of it in both ways. Turning to the example of the grocery store, you might wish to make your shopping trip an act of generosity. Perhaps you might buy something with the intention of giving it to someone, a friend, a family member, or a neighbor. Could also extend to donating to food banks or participating in store initiatives that support those in need. The key is to give without seeking anything in return, and thereby cultivating a generous spirit. Okay, the third branch is confession or purification. In this branch, we reflect on our past negative actions and thoughts, openly confessing them with a sincere heart of repentance. This practice is crucial for purifying negative karma and fostering a clear conscience and moral integrity. So, just one verse, verse 8 here. Whatever negative acts I have committed while driven by desire, hatred, and ignorance, with my body, my speech, and also with my mind, before you I confess and purify each and every one. So Rinpoche said, this third cause for accomplishing aspiration is to confess all our negative actions of body, speech, and mind that we've committed from beginningless time until now in their entirety. And here the Bodhisattva path has a somewhat unique attitude, that we can confess negative actions even that we may not remember or realize that we have committed. Yeah, so even thinking about how might we confess something we cannot recall having done, I think is a much grander way of thinking about accountability. And in Buddhism, the concept of negative actions is quite vast. Really, it's about what takes you away from reality, or what takes you away from the truth. Last week we talked about not having non-virtuous or evil companions, and that was the same idea. Rinpoche said it wasn't so much about people who distract you by going to the movies, but people who turn you away from the Dharma in some way. And this makes it clear that what we want here is always about reality and truth. Rinpoche has often explained that in Buddhism, the way we think about ethical or moral behavior, the way we think about good and bad, is quite different from the Western Abrahamic or Judeo-Christian way of thinking about good and evil. So I think there were lots of questions over the various times Rinpoche has taught this, asking about, how we can behave well. And I think for those of us who've grown up with more of a Judeo-Christian cultural background, I think we can sometimes confuse that way of thinking about good and bad with the Buddhist version, which is much more about understanding truth, understanding reality, and therefore about ignorance as not understanding that. So in the Longchen Intik Nindro, here Patrul Rinpoche says, with this thought we confess as explained in the chapter on Vajrasattva. So these first three practices of prostration, offering, and confession are actually building on earlier practices in the Nindro. So the grocery store example. As you shop, perhaps you could consider being mindful of your choices and their impacts. If you find yourself gravitating towards excessive or unhealthy or environmentally harmful products, you can acknowledge this internally and use that moment of awareness to commit to making better choices, whatever that means for you, whether that's buying less or choosing more sustainable options, or simply being more conscious of your consumption habits, or even your own health. Okay, turning to the fourth branch, which is rejoicing, or joyful praise. And this involves rejoicing in the virtuous deeds and qualities of the Buddhas, bodhisattvas, and all sentient beings. It's a practice to cultivate positive mental states, counteracting envy and jealousy. So this is also one verse, verse 9. With a heart full of delight, I rejoice at all the merits of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, Pratyeka Buddhas, those in training, and the Arhats beyond training, and every living being throughout the entire universe. So here, as Rinpoche said, it's like we're getting so excited about the qualities of all of the Buddhas. In a mundane way of putting it, rejoicing is about getting excited about others who are having a good time and having good qualities. So here we rejoice at the incredible qualities of the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, right? All the different enlightened beings on different vehicles of Buddhism. And not only them, we rejoice at all beings who have sublime or ordinary virtue and good qualities. We're really happy that such qualities exist. We are not envious. We are not jealous. We don't feel competitive. As he said, we almost feel relief that there are guys out there with these such great qualities. Now we can relax a bit because there's someone who can take care of us, take care of the world. There's someone who knows what they're doing. The world is not that lost. And I think many of us in our current world can feel despair at leaders in politics and business. And I know many young people in particular feel that leaders are not focused on what really matters to them. So where we see good examples, even in the ordinary world, that's really something to celebrate. And Rinpoche said even non-Buddhists have practices of offering prostrations, making offerings and praise and so forth, but rejoicing seems to be unique to Buddhism, especially the Mahayana path. And here we're rejoicing in both the cause and the effect. So the effect, for example, when you see someone who is beautiful, handsome, attractive, enjoying that result of the positive cause, then you rejoice in that. Now, of course, that's a very mediocre or general form of rejoicing. A much greater rejoicing is rejoicing in the cause and effect that is accomplished or created by Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. In other words, the causes of merit and the action of creating merit of all beings. So in the grocery store example, you might take a moment to feel joy for the abundance available to you and for the successes of others who've been involved in the chain of supply. This could be as simple as appreciating the variety of food, or being happy for the local farmers whose products are featured in the store. Recognizing and celebrating these positive aspects can help counter envy and competitiveness. Okay, the fifth is requesting to turn the wheel of Dharma. And here we're requesting that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas continue teaching the Dharma, ensuring that the teachings are available for the benefit of all beings, thus preventing the Dharma from fading away in this world. So one verse, verse 10. You who are like beacons of light shining through the worlds, who passed through the stages of enlightenment to attain Buddhahood, freedom from all attachment, I exhort you, all of you protectors, turn the unsurpassable wheel of Dharma. So, as Rinpoche said, we're supplicating all of these Buddhas, who are the real illuminators of this world that is filled with darkness, and we're requesting them to teach, but also to point out our mistakes, to lead us to the right path, to answer our questions, to clear our doubt, to increase our enthusiasm, and generate our confidence towards the spiritual path. So I really like here this idea that turning the wheel of the Dharma is much more than just going through a text, but it's really engaging with us as a mitra, as a spiritual friend, helping point out our mistakes, inspiring us, generating confidence, something much more holistic. And so in that context, I think we can also bear in mind how we approach the Dharma, how we listen to the teachings. And going back to the words of my perfect teacher, there's the nice example of the 3 defects of a pot. So imagine you're trying to fill a pot with water. The first defect is if you simply don't listen, or if you get distracted, that's like having a pot that is turned upside down. You can't begin to fill it with water. The second example is having a pot with a hole in it. No matter how many teachings you might hear, you will never retain them or assimilate them or put them into practice. And the third example is a pot with poison in it. So this is about mixing negative emotions or defilements or ego with what you're hearing. So that's listening to the Dharma perhaps with a desire to become great or famous, or others of the 5 poisons, in which case the Dharma will not only fail to help your mind, it will also be changed into something that is not Dharma at all, like nectar being poured into a pot containing poison. Again, Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche spoke a lot of spiritual materialism, how we take Dharma as an adornment for our ego, rather than as a means for purifying our ego. So just to, again, be honest with ourselves. How are we listening to the teachings? What is our attitude? Another of my favorite stories is from the Zen tradition, the story A Cup of Tea. So Nan-in received a university professor who came to inquire about Zen. Nan-in served tea. He poured his visitor's cup full and then kept on pouring. The professor watched the overflow until he could no longer restrain himself. "It is overfull. No more will go in." "Like this cup," Nan-in said, "you are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen until you first empty your cup?" So, in the grocery store, perhaps we might turn this offering, this branch, into a wish or hope for the continued education and awareness of us and all consumers around healthy and ethical consumption. While we're shopping, it might mean favoring products from companies that engage in such educational efforts about nutrition or sustainability, thus supporting the spread of beneficial knowledge about how to shop and how to consume. Okay, the 6th branch is requesting to remain. So this is about urging the enlightened beings to remain in the world and not enter final nirvana, so they can continue to assist beings in their spiritual journeys. This is verse 11. "Joining my palms together, I pray to you who intend to pass into nirvana. Remain for aeons as many as the atoms in this world, and bring well-being and happiness to all living beings." Here Rinpoche said, if there are Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who might wish to, he said, how should I put it, conclude their display of benefiting sentient beings, in other words, those who might wish to pass into parinirvana, urgently, in haste, we ask them not to do that. We say, yes, we're slow, we're stupid, we may not learn right away, but have compassion, bear with us. Please live long, if necessary, live for aeons and aeons. So, perhaps in a grocery store example, we might encourage the presence of goodness in the world by supporting ethical practices, choosing products from companies that treat workers well, or use sustainable farming practices, or actively work towards positive social impacts, whatever good might mean to us in that relative way. And understanding that through our choices, our aspirations, we can encourage these good forces to remain and expand in the outer world, in the marketplace. Okay, the 7th branch is dedication, where we dedicate the merit accumulated from these initial practices for the enlightenment of all beings, And this reflects the Mahayana principle of bodhicitta, aiming for the ultimate liberation of every sentient being from suffering. This is verse 12. What little virtue I have gathered through my homage, through offering, confession, and rejoicing, through exhortation and prayer, all of it I dedicate to the enlightenment of all beings. As Rinpoche said, this is the standard, painless, but incredible, powerful Mahayana technique to accumulate merit. And through this, we're setting the foundation for our subsequent aspiration. We've generated merit or ability to do things. We now have the ability to aspire. So we're going to dedicate, of course, the whole prayer at the very end in verses 55 to 60. We'll come to that in a later week. But we already wish to dedicate what we've done in these preliminary verses. You can't dedicate enough. It's a full practice on its own. Perhaps in the shopping trip example, you might conclude with a silent dedication of the merit of your actions, like choosing sustainable products or buying things in order to offer to a friend or to make donations. And you dedicate all this to the benefit of others. You might hope that your actions contribute to a healthy, happy world, dedicating the benefits of your mindful shopping to all being. Okay, so that's the verses, but I also wanted to talk a little about the idea that these different branches of the 7 branch offerings are also serving or functioning as antidotes to different defilements. A lot of the questions that come up from practitioners have a lot to do with our experience or our emotions on the path. So either our experiences or emotions as we're engaging in practice, or as we are engaging in the world, right, in our post-meditation, whether it's in our relationships, in our family, or just looking at what's going on in the outer world. Right? So this is all to do with our emotions and therefore with defilements. So traditionally in Buddhism, we talk of 3 poisons, right? 3 afflictions or character flaws that are the root of craving, and thus in part the cause of dukkha, right? Suffering, pain, unsatisfactoriness, and also of rebirths. And they're symbolically drawn at the center of the Buddhist Bhava Chakra, right? The Wheel of Life artwork. So these 3 are passion, also termed attachment or greed or lust, and that's represented by the rooster. The second is aggression, or anger, or hatred, or ill will, which is represented by the snake. And the third is ignorance, or delusion, or confusion, which is represented by the pig. And we can also see these as 3 ways of relating to anything we consider to be an object or a phenomenon, whether it's in the external world or in the inner world of our own mind and emotion. So those 3 ways of, firstly, we could say, well, we like it. Right? The things that we like are about pulling towards us. We want more of it. So that is the poison of passion or greed. The second reaction we might have is we might think, well, I don't like it. I want to push it away, get rid of it. That's the poison of aggression or anger. And then the third way we could relate to it is we might not even notice it, or we might not care. We might just think it's irrelevant. Right? And that corresponds to the poison of ignorance. And of course, these 3 poisons can also be turned inwards, right, towards our own thoughts, our own emotions, our own self, our own life. And when we do that, that can have significantly negative effects on our own mental health, our self-perception, our overall well-being. It can contribute to cycles of self-criticism, guilt, low self-esteem, and other painful mental states. And this is, of course, very relevant with the mental health crisis we're seeing in the world today, especially post-COVID, and especially amongst younger people. There's been a lot written about the influence of social media, living a life online, and what that's doing to people's sense of anxiety, depression, self-criticism, and so forth. We can also understand these three poisons through the lens of evolutionary psychology. So some of you may have come across Robert Wright's book, Why Buddhism is True, where he's explaining the Dharma in or through the lens of evolutionary psychology, which is all about the ways in which our psychological traits, such as our emotions and thoughts and behaviors, have been shaped by natural selection. And from this perspective, our responses to the environment, including other people or events outside us, and also our own internal experiences, right, our own inner environment, they can be understood as adaptations that at one point in our evolutionary history increased our ancestors' chances of survival and reproduction. But nowadays, these adaptations can sometimes work against our well-being in modern contexts. So let me talk about the three poisons through these lenses. So first, passion or attachment, greed, lust. The evolutionary perspective would be that the drive towards attachment and the pursuit of pleasurable experiences like food, or sex, or social status can be understood as mechanisms that once ensured survival and reproductive success. For example, the desire for high-calorie foods and sexual partners at one point was very important in contributing to the survival of our genes, or our ancestors' genes. A Buddhist perspective would be that while natural and often enjoyable, attachment can lead to suffering when we cling to impermanent objects or experiences, then leading to disappointment, loss, and a cycle of continuous craving and addiction. We can integrate these by understanding that our attachments are often amplified by our evolutionary predispositions, and that can help us understand and gradually loosen the grip of these desires, perhaps finding contentment in simpler pleasures and deeper connections that are not solely based on instinctual drives. And if we think about how these might be turned inward, internalized passion can manifest as attachment to certain self-images, identities, or internal narratives that we believe are essential for our happiness or self-worth. It can include narcissism, an obsession with self-improvement, even to the point of never feeling good enough, a relentless pursuit of perfection, or clinging to past versions of ourselves that no longer serve us. Maybe we feel unworthy if we don't constantly achieve success. Maybe we attach our self-esteem to external validation or accomplishments, or become preoccupied with maintaining a certain image or identity, even when it causes us distress. So all of these are ways of understanding how this poison can show up in our ordinary life. Okay, the second one, aggression, which is also anger or hatred. So from an evolutionary perspective, aggression can be seen as a protective mechanism, helping our ancestors defend against threats and compete successfully for resources. And the response to perceived threats was crucial for survival in a more dangerous, resource-scarce environment. A Buddhist perspective would be that while necessary for protection, habitual anger and hatred cause personal suffering and harm to others. These emotions cloud our judgment and lead to destructive actions and a cycle of retaliation. So if we understand that anger and hatred are evolutionary responses to threats, we can pause and ask ourselves whether an aggressive reaction is proportionate to the situation. So practices like mindfulness and compassion can help us respond to conflicts with wisdom rather than instinctive aggression. And turn inwards, aggression can often appear as self-criticism, guilt, self-hatred. This internal aggression can be very punishing, holding ourselves to unrealistic standards, berating ourselves for perceived failures or shortcomings, also manifesting as guilt that goes beyond healthy remorse, becoming a pervasive sense of being fundamentally flawed, unworthy of happiness. Now, many of us, especially in the era of social media, we engage in this kind of negative self-assessment or self-criticism, harsh self-talk, constantly feeling guilty for not meeting our self-imposed or societal standards, or experiencing intense feelings of self-loathing for our mistakes or our human imperfections. Okay, third one then, ignorance or delusion, confusion. And from an evolutionary perspective, ignorance in the form of not noticing or caring about certain stimuli can be an adaptive response to information overload, allowing our ancestors to focus on what was most relevant to survival and reproduction. However, of course, this can also lead to a lack of awareness about important aspects of our environment and inner lives. From a Buddhist perspective, ignorance is the fundamental poison, the misperception of the nature of reality or truth, particularly the belief in the permanent self and the inherent existence of phenomena. And this misperception is seen as the root of all other suffering. So we could perhaps integrate these ideas by recognizing that our tendency to ignore or be indifferent to things that don't immediately seem relevant can sometimes be helpful in helping us focus, but that we can also cultivate mindfulness and awareness to check whether we're making the right choices. And we can turn towards things we might otherwise ignore or reject. We can begin to perceive the interconnectedness of all things and the impermanent nature of our experiences, and thereby align our awareness more closely with reality. So in this way, we're practicing both shamatha, learning to be non-distracted, learning to turn towards, but also vipassana, right? Learning to see things more accurately, more truthfully. Now, ignorance turned inwards manifests as a lack of self-awareness, misunderstanding of our true nature, unwillingness to see who we are. But it can also involve underestimating our potential, doubting our intrinsic worth, or harboring misperceptions about our abilities and limitations. We can be disconnected or not pay attention to our feelings, our needs, our aspirations, and we can live in ways that don't align with our true value or purposes. I think especially as Dharma practitioners, that kind of inner disconnection from our true aspiration, I think that's a gap that it will really help us to begin to close. Now, of course, in different Buddhist traditions or teachings, there are many different ways of talking about or enumerating these defilements. So in the Abhidhamma Kusha, the treasury of Abhidhamma, which was a systematic account written by the Indian Pandita Vasubandhu in the 5th or 4th century CE, that's considered the peak of scholarship in the Theravada vehicle. And there are 6 defilements. So the 3 poisons we've already discussed, right? Ignorance, attachment, anger, but also pride and doubt and wrong views. Another way of thinking about it is a way that's often seen in the Vajrayana, where we talk about 5 Buddha families, also 5 wisdoms, which are then the purified version of 5 poisons, right? So here we have the 3 poisons, but also pride and jealousy. So in different commentaries, there's many different ways that this 7-branch offering is explained as counteracting the various poisons. I'm going to use the example from a Tibetan master called Chiki Drakpa, who wrote a Nundro commentary called A Torch for the Path to Omniscience. And here he considers that the first of the offerings, the first branch, prostration or homage, is the antidote to pride. Pride is the overinflated sense of self-importance and superiority over others. It's a barrier to our learning and growth because it closes our mind to the wisdom of others. And prostration counteracts pride by cultivating humility and reverence. By physically bowing down and mentally paying homage to the Buddhas and enlightened beings, we acknowledge their qualities, their achievements, and thereby dissolve the ego's hold and open our hearts to learning and developing compassion. The second offering, which is offering, is the antidote to avarice or greed. That's the intense and selfish desire for wealth or resources or possessions or fame or status, and comes from attachment and of course leads to suffering. And offering involves giving away something valuable, either symbolically or actually, which counteracts our greed by cultivating non-attachment. The practice of mandala offering, where the universe and all of its treasures are envisioned as being offered, helps to loosen the grip of material attachment and develop a mind of abundance and also joy in giving. The third branch of confession is the antidote to aggression. So aggression, anger, hatred comes from aversion. It's destructive, obscures our mind, prevents the cultivation of peace and compassion. And confession involves acknowledging and purifying our own negative deeds, especially those driven by aggression or anger, which are often said in the teachings to be the strongest of all negative deeds. And reciting the Vajrasattva mantra or visualizing purification can transform the energy of aggression into wisdom and clarity, facilitating profound inner peace. The fourth branch, or rejoicing, is the antidote to jealousy. So jealousy is the resentment towards others' success or happiness. It's a source of very unnecessary suffering stemming from comparison and competition. So by rejoicing in the virtues and accomplishments of others, we can counteract jealousy, cultivating genuine happiness for others' success. It transforms our mind of comparison and contrasting into one of appreciation and interconnected joy, undermining the isolating effects of jealousy. The fifth branch, questing to turn the wheel of Dharma, is the antidote to ignorance. So in the Buddhist context, as we've seen, ignorance refers to the fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of reality, especially the nature of emptiness and interdependence. And by requesting the enlightened masters and Buddhas to turn the wheel of the Dharma, we're aspiring for the continued presence of the teachings, recognizing their value in dispelling our ignorance. It affirms the importance of wisdom and learning in overcoming ignorance and fosters our own commitment to the path of enlightenment. The sixth branch, requesting the enlightened ones not to pass into parinirvana, is the antidote to wrong views, including misconceptions about the nature of reality, about what is ethical conduct, how to follow the path to liberation, all the obstacles that are getting in the way of our understanding and practicing the Dharma correctly. So this plea for the enlightened ones to remain is to ask them to guide beings, emphasize the value of correct teachings, maintaining our correct understanding and practice of Dharma, as Rinpoche explained earlier. And finally, the seventh branch, dedication, is the antidote to doubt. Where doubt is uncertainty or skepticism about the teachings or one's practice or the path to enlightenment, which can paralyze or prevent our practice and really get in the way of our progress on the path. So dedication is about offering the positive energy that we've accumulated through our practice to the benefit of all beings, as we've seen. And it counteracts doubts by reinforcing the efficacy and the purpose of our practice, connecting our personal progress to the broader aspiration for universal enlightenment, helps us solidify our confidence and faith in the path and the interconnectedness of all efforts towards liberation. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about this much more in future weeks. So I would like to say just a few things about emptiness and inconceivability, even in these early verses. And we're going to come to this in more depth and more detail in future weeks. But at this stage, it's already useful to think about how might we approach or think about emptiness or inconceivability in these early verses, right? And in the Bodhisattva path, we talk about the practice of the paramitas. There are typically 6: generosity, discipline, patience, diligence, meditation, and wisdom. And in Mahayana Buddhism, the concept of a paramita represents a perfection or transcendent quality that bodhisattvas are cultivating on the path to enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. So the term paramita literally means to the other shore, which is para, and mita means gone, right? So it means gone to the other shore, indicating a crossing over from the shore of samsara or cyclic existence to the shore of nirvana or liberation. The analogy of the Buddha being a boatman who takes us across the river, across the water. And this transformation is not just a quantitative change, but a qualitative shift in how we practice our virtues, right? So for example, the ordinary practice of generosity in our everyday life is built on and extended to make the paramita of generosity. And we can think of this in 4 different ways that we're going beyond our ordinary generosity in terms of intention, wisdom, scope, and nature. So let me just give an example here with generosity. So in ordinary generosity, our acts of giving often come with expectations of gratitude or recognition, or perhaps a favorable outcome for ourselves. And while our motivation may be positive, it may be still rooted in a self-centered desire or expectation of a reciprocal benefit. Whereas the paramita of generosity is characterized by a purely altruistic intention to benefit others without any expectation of reward or recognition. Our primary motivation is the welfare of others and ultimately the attainment of enlightenment for all beings. And our motivation is bodhicitta, aspiration to achieve enlightenment for helping all sentient beings. Okay, the difference in wisdom. An ordinary generosity might not always be informed by deep understanding of the recipient's needs or the long-term consequences of our gift. The act is often driven by immediate circumstances or our emotional responses. Whereas generosity at the level of a paramita is practiced with wisdom and discernment. It means understanding the most beneficial way to give, what to give, when to give, and to whom, so that our acts of giving truly benefit the recipient. This wisdom is rooted in an understanding of emptiness, seeing beyond the conventional notions of giver, gift, and recipient, and recognizing the interdependent nature of all phenomena. At its most fully developed, generosity is an expression of non-dual wisdom. In terms of scope, ordinary generosity is usually limited, right? We are thinking of a relatively small number of beings, often directly confined to those within our immediate circle or community. Whereas the paramita of generosity has a boundless scope, aiming to benefit all beings without discrimination. The practitioner of generosity seeks to freely give without bias or prejudice, including giving material aid, protection from fear, and sharing the Dharma. And finally, the nature of the gift. Ordinarily, the gifts might be material or worldly benefits, which, while valuable, offer temporary relief or temporary happiness. With the paramita of generosity, while material gifts are not excluded, we want to encompass non-material gifts as well, such as fearlessness, love, and ultimately the gift of Dharma. The highest form of generosity is considered sharing the teachings that lead to liberation. So in essence, the transition from ordinary practices to their paramita counterparts involves a profound deepening of our motivation, an expansion of wisdom, and an extension of the scope of these virtues. Right, so the practice of these paramitas is what sets the bodhisattva path apart from ordinary good deeds, aiming not just for personal liberation but for the enlightenment of all beings. Right, so when we think about our practice of the King of Aspiration prayers, we think about the nature of what it is to engage in a paramita. I really encourage you to bear that in mind. And just thinking about how might we consider these 7 stages as we progress from beginners to, more able to integrate a realization of emptiness in our practice and in our path, I've put together some thoughts on how we might do that. So first, let's look at prostration. And I've got the same 4 stages for each of these, where we start before the path, right? Ordinary sentient beings who have not even committed to some sort of spiritual practice. Then there's the initial stage of practice, which tends to be more about early experiences, trying to solidify and clarify our understanding. The intermediate stage, where our understanding becomes a real lived experience, much more integrated with our emotions as well as our intellectual understanding. And then finally, a more advanced practitioner really has a more integrated or unified practice, where non-duality and emptiness are really infusing the practice. So with prostration, the first stage is indifference. Absence of reverence to the path, instead skepticism towards spiritual traditions. Then respect, where we have acts of reverence motivated by respect for the three jewels. As intermediate practitioners, we have devotion, right? Heartfelt prostrations, where it's not just out of respect, but because we really understand and recognize the qualities of the three jewels. And finally, we reach a stage of unity, where prostrations are an experiential understanding of non-duality, reflecting the emptiness of inherent existence in the act, the practitioner, and the object of reverence. Okay, next, offering. Before the path, it's greed. We're dominated by greed and consumerism, unaware of the spiritual value or significance of offering. We then move to hope, where we make offerings in hope of merit or spiritual rewards. Then to genuine generosity, where our offerings are not just for spiritual rewards, but because we understand the importance of cultivating generosity and non-attachment on our path for the benefit of others. Finally, inseparability, where we realize the act of offering, offerer, and offering itself are expressions of emptiness that transcend conventional notions of giver and receiver. Confession starts with denial, unwillingness to acknowledge our faults. We then go to genuine regret and desire to purify, then taking a profound sense of responsibility and ethical commitment to our path and our practice. And finally, seeing the emptiness of actions, understanding that while actions in their imprints lack inherent existence, purification is nevertheless crucial to clear our obscurations, so we have a much more nuanced view of karma and emptiness. With rejoicing, we start out with envy. We struggle to find joy in others' success. Then we move to appreciation. We rejoice in others' virtues as an antidote to jealousy. Then our joy becomes genuine. We're truly able to celebrate all forms of virtue and progress in others, and in ourselves, of course. And finally, we see inherent goodness. We recognize that virtuous activity is an expression of the basic goodness and non-duality inherent in reality, and distinctions between self and other dissolve. Requesting to turn the wheel, initially indifference or even hostility towards the value of teachings. We then value teachings for the sake of personal growth. Then move to commitment, understanding the importance of Dharma transmission for all beings. And finally, see the ultimate transition. We request teachings with the recognition that the ultimate Dharma transcends words and concepts, and we aspire to realize the direct experience of non-duality and emptiness. Requesting to remain initially self-serving, we're not really thinking about spiritual guidance at all, we're just focusing on immediate and worldly desires. Then we transition to requesting, we realize that help would be of benefit. Next, understanding, we see the essential role of enlightened beings in the Dharma's continuation. And finally, a timeless presence, where our insight extends to the timeless and boundless nature of enlightened beings. We understand deeply non-duality and the non-coming and non-going of phenomena in the context of emptiness. Finally, dedication. Initially, very self-interested. We're focusing just on personal gain, minimum concern with the welfare of others. Then, and hopefully we can really all be doing this now, we're aspiring genuinely. We're dedicating our merits with the aspiration for happiness, but for spiritual goals. Not just for self, but for others. And that brings us to interconnectedness, where we really recognize the interconnectedness of all beings and dedicate our merits for universal enlightenment. And eventually we'll achieve a state of interdependent reality, with a profound realization of emptiness and interdependence, where the act of dedication, the merit, and the beneficiaries are seen as interwoven expression of the Bodhisattva's vow to liberate all beings. Okay, so in closing, I'd just like to think a little about how we might practice this in the context of relationships, but especially in the context of Sangha, or our spiritual community. Rinpoche has talked a lot about how Christians especially do a really good job in creating very vibrant and caring spiritual communities that emphasize kindness and care and help. And he's encouraged us as Buddhists to do more within our own communities, welcoming and including newcomers and caring for each other, but also as a field of practice for our own cultivation of bodhicitta. So doing so is not only for our own benefit, but strengthening the community as a whole. And so in the context of the seven branch offering, prostration then, in the relative or material sense, would mean showing respect and kindness to others in the Sangha, recognizing their commitment to the path, as simple as greeting them warmly, listening attentively when they speak, or showing appreciation for their practice and contributions. A more non-dual or emptiness-oriented approach might be to cultivate the understanding that the act of showing respect is not just about social niceties, but is a recognition of the Buddha nature inherent in every person. In this way, our reverence is not dependent on hierarchical status or how long someone might have been practicing Dharma, but a recognition of our shared and universal potential for enlightenment. The second branch of offering, relatively, we can offer help and support to Sangha members, whether through sharing resources, emotional support, or volunteering for community tasks. Acts of service and generosity strengthen our bonds and purify our own avarice and greed. From an emptiness perspective, we can make offerings without attachment to the self who offers or the expectation of gratitude. We can understand these acts of generosity are expressions of interconnectedness, reflecting the practice of giving at a deeper, more profound level. The third branch of confession. Relatively, when there are conflicts or misunderstandings in the Sangha with our friends and colleagues, we can take responsibility for our part. We can apologize, we can seek reconciliation as practical applications of this third branch. More ultimately, we can reflect that the nature of mistakes and conflicts arises from a web of conditions and lacks inherent existence. This practice can foster a more compassionate approach to resolving difficulties, and one not fixated on blame but focused on mutual growth and deeper understanding. The fourth, rejoicing. Relatively, we can actively celebrate the achievements and virtues of Sangha members. We can encourage and support each other's practice and accomplishments, and thereby foster a positive and uplifting environment. More ultimately, we can rejoice with the understanding that the virtues and achievements are the manifestations of the same ultimate nature that we all share, dissolving any sense of separation or competition. Fifth, requesting the turning of the wheel of Dharma. Relatively, we encourage the sharing of teachings and insights within the Sangha, and request teachings from those more experienced, or share our own insights when appropriate to improve collective understanding. From an emptiness or non-dual perspective, we approach the request and sharing of Dharma with the recognition that teachings transcend individual perspectives, pointing to a shared reality beyond words and concepts. The sixth, requesting to remain. Relatively, it means encouraging and supporting Sangha members to continue with their practice, especially in times of doubt or difficulty. Our encouragement can be a crucial support for others. Ultimately, recognizing that encouragement to persist in practice is an affirmation of the non-dual truth that underlies our experiences, urging each other to realize and embody this truth fully. Finally, dedication. Relatively, we dedicate the merits of our practice and achievements to the well-being and enlightenment of all members of the Sangha and beyond. We share success in this way to multiply its positive impact. And more ultimately, we understand that dedication is an expression of the interdependent nature of existence. By dedicating merit, we acknowledge that no achievement is personal or isolated. It is a wave in the ocean of collective existence. And so with this, let us take a moment to dedicate whatever merit we might have generated today. and dedicated to the enlightenment of all sentient beings. And with that, I thank you for joining us and look forward to seeing you next week.